They said I'd be home in a week. That's what they told the nurse when they dropped me off. She just needs a few nights to get her strength back. My daughter smiled like she meant it. My son-in-law signed the forms. I waved goodbye from the wheelchair, thinking I'd be back in my own kitchen by Sunday. That was 19 days ago. It was a small fall. My hip didn't break, thank the Lord, just bruised. But I hadn't been eating well, and the hospital staff thought I looked a little frail, so they recommended a short stay at the rehab wing, just to regain mobility. They called it temporary. The first few nights were quiet. I shared a room with a woman named Alice, who talked in her sleep. Her daughter visited every morning, brought crossword books and banana bread. I waited by the window, watched cars pull into the lot, hoping one would be hers. Nothing. On day 4, a nurse came in with a cardboard box. "Your daughter dropped off some of your things," she said gently. A sweater, a pair of socks, 2 paperbacks, and a photo of me and my late husband from the garden party in '92. My breath caught. There was no note, no message, just a folded sheet of paper tucked beneath the frame. A printout of a property tax receipt. My address, but not my name. Instead, it listed current occupants, Amanda and Ethan Myers. I stared at it until my hands shook. I asked to use the hallway phone, called Amanda's number. Voicemail. Tried again. Voicemail. On the 3rd try, I left a message. "Hi, sweetheart. Got the box. Thank you. Just checking when you'll visit." I didn't mention the receipt. I didn't ask why it was in there. I thought maybe it was a mistake. The next morning, I asked a nurse to help me walk to the lobby. There was a desktop computer there, mostly for visitors to check emails. I asked if I could use it. She logged me in. I typed my address into a search bar. And there it was. Photos of my home, my front porch, my kitchen, my rose garden, in full bloom. Charming 3-bedroom in a desirable neighborhood. Showings by appointment only. Contact agent below. I didn't feel the room. I didn't feel my hands. I just stared. They were selling my house, not discussing it, not asking, not even informing, just doing. I sat there for a long while. People walked past. The afternoon sun moved across the tile, but I didn't move. I thought of the doorknob in the hallway I replaced myself when Ethan said we couldn't afford a handyman. Of the lemon tree in the backyard we planted when Amanda was 8. Of the fireplace Ethan built brick by brick during our first winter. I thought of the guest room where Amanda stayed for 2 years after her divorce. The checks I never cashed, the groceries I bought, the baby I watched so she could go back to work. And now, showings by appointment. I asked to be taken back to my room. I didn't speak much the rest of the day. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and tried to count the number of things I had given away without question. Time, money, years. The house wasn't just a place. It was proof of a life, of effort, of love. And they were treating it like a listing on Zillow. The next morning, I requested my file. The hospital social worker hesitated, but finally handed me the paperwork I had signed when I was admitted. Nowhere did it say power of attorney. Nowhere did it list Amanda as decision maker. Just me, my signature. I smiled. For the first time in days, I smiled. The house was still mine. It wasn't in their name. I'd never transferred it. After Ethan passed, I'd kept it clean. The mortgage paid off in full, taxes current. I remembered the title sitting in my lawyer's file, right where Ethan and I left it when we updated our wills. He'd said, "Better to keep it simple. Just in your name for now." God bless that man's instincts. I asked the nurse for help with email. Typed one address I hadn't used in years. The subject line was simple. Do you still have the deed? I clicked send. The reply came within an hour. 4 words. Yes, it's still yours. I didn't reply to his email right away. I just sat with it, stared at the words until they felt real. It's still yours. They echoed louder than anything Amanda had said in years. Not, I love you, not thank you, not even, I'm sorry. Just silence, avoidance, and now, erasure. But Larry's email, those 4 words, pulled me back like a lifeline. That afternoon, the head nurse knocked on my door with a clipboard in her hands and a polite smile too practiced to trust. "Mrs. Mayfield," she said, "your daughter called. She said they'll be extending your stay here a bit longer, just to be safe." I didn't approve that, I said quietly. She hesitated. Well, she mentioned some concerns about home safety, accessibility. I looked at her straight. Do I still have the right to check myself out? Her smile faltered. Of course, but... Good. Then I'm not extending anything. I waited until she left, then reached into the drawer beside my bed and pulled out the photo Amanda had sent. Me and Ethan in our Sunday best. The garden blooming behind us. He had that same smile he wore when he fixed the sink himself for the 5th time because we couldn't afford a plumber. A man who'd worked 3 jobs for 12 years so Amanda could go to college debt-free. I ran my finger over his face. They think I forgot, Ethan, I whispered. But I didn't. The next morning, I called Larry. He picked up on the 2nd ring. "Ellie," he said, his voice warm like an old sweater. "I was hoping you'd call. You have the deed. I've had it since '84. You and Ethan never moved it. Still filed under Eleanor M. Mayfield. And it's valid? Completely. I checked the county records last week when I saw your email. Your name's still on every page that matters." I closed my eyes, exhaled through my nose. I need to sell it. Larry didn't ask why. He just said, "Say no more. I'll get the paperwork started. Do you want to use a realtor?" "I'll need someone discreet and fast. I know a woman. Smart, quick, private. She helped my sister-in-law sell her place last year without a single open house. Her name's Mira Lawson. Give her my number." We talked for another few minutes, catching up. How his wife's garden club was still thriving, how his knees hated the cold now. When we hung up, I felt steadier than I had in months. Mira called 2 hours later. Her voice was sharp but kind, the kind of voice you trust even when you don't want to. "Mr. Levine told me your situation," she said. "You want the house listed quietly? No public signs? No flyers? No visitors, no open houses. Only direct showings with serious buyers. I want this clean." "Understood. I'll have a photographer there by Friday." "They've changed the locks," I said. "You'll need to use the back entrance, the garden gate. I left a spare key in the soil beneath the rosemary, if they haven't dug it up yet." She laughed softly. "Got it. You're a planner." "Not anymore," I said. "Now I'm just a woman taking back what she was never supposed to give up." True to her word, Mira texted photos by Saturday morning. My house looked hollow. My rocking chair was gone. The entryway table Amanda used to draw at was now replaced with some modern sculpture I didn't recognize. The colour on the walls was new too, grey, like wet cement. It was no longer a home. It was a set piece, a showroom. But beneath it all, the bones were still mine. Mira's message came with a PDF attachment, the draft listing. She'd written it beautifully. Classic craftsman, mature trees, lovingly maintained since 1983, single owner history. That last line made my throat catch. I gave her my approval. "List it Monday morning," I typed. "No delays." She replied with a thumbs up and the word, Done. On Sunday, Amanda finally called. I stared at the phone as it buzzed, watched her name flicker on the screen like a warning light. I let it ring out, then again, and again. Finally, I answered. "Hi, Mom," she said, too bright. "Just checking in. How's your hip?" "It's healing," I said simply. "That's good. Listen, I know this place isn't fun, but it's for the best, you know. Safety and all. And Ethan's been working from the den, so the house is full right now anyway." "You mean my house?" There was a pause. "Well, we're all family, Mom." "No," I said, my voice flat. "You're living in it. I'm not. That's not family. That's occupation." "Mom, don't be dramatic. I'm not. But I am done being quiet." And I hung up. She didn't call back right away, which told me she was still in that stunned silence people retreat to when they realize their plan isn't going the way they imagined. Amanda had always assumed my compliance was a given, like a light switch she could flip on and off. But I had learned, slowly and painfully, that silence is not submission. It's calculation. That night, I asked one of the younger nurses to help me print a few documents Larry had emailed. My title deed, the power of attorney forms, and an updated will we had drawn up the year after Ethan passed. She didn't ask questions, just smiled and said, "You planning a comeback?" I smiled back. Something like that. I kept the papers in a manila envelope and slid it under my pillow like a secret I was finally ready to protect. The room around me smelled of bleach and microwaved peas, the sounds of the hallway muffled by thick doors and tired walls. But I felt more in control in that small hospital bed than I had in years. On Monday, Mira listed the house. She called me at 9:17 a.m. "It's up. 3 buyers already reached out. One's a young couple moving up from San Diego. The other is a widow relocating to be near her son. And the third, well, he's a cash buyer. No questions. Wants to see it today." "No open houses," I reminded her. "Private showing only. I'll be there." That afternoon, I asked to be wheeled outside. I needed air. The orderly pushed me to the far end of the garden, where the hospital lawn met a row of eucalyptus trees. I could smell the sap, thick and familiar. I watched the breeze comb through the branches. It reminded me of my backyard, of sitting with Ethan in the evenings, sipping sweet tea and talking about everything and nothing. I missed those silences more than words. Around 3 p.m., Mira texted. "Showing went well. Cash buyers ready to make an offer. Above list." I stared at the message. It felt like lightning and calm in the same breath. I typed slowly. "Proceed." "Done. You'll get the paperwork by morning?" By the time the sun dipped low behind the parking lot and the nurses wheeled us back inside, I felt like I had turned a key. Not out of spite, not even out of anger, but out of necessity. Because there's a difference between taking your time and having it taken from you. And I had let mine be taken long enough. That evening, Amanda called again. This time I answered on the third ring. "I just got off the phone with Ethan," she said sharply. "He said there's some listing online." "There is," I said. Her voice rose. "Mom, what are you doing?" "I'm selling my house." "You can't just—" "That's our home now." "No," I said calmly. "It's mine. You moved in. You changed things. You locked me out. But you never owned it." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "This isn't you." "You're right," I said. "This is the version of me you never thought would show up, the one who remembers who she is." She went quiet, and I didn't fill the silence. Eventually, she said, "I thought we agreed." "No, Amanda, you decided. I was just too tired to fight." She hung up. The next morning, Larry called. "Offers in? Full cash? Above list?" Buyer's ready to close in 10 days. All we need is your signature. Send it. He chuckled. Didn't think I'd ever see this day, Ellie. I didn't think I'd survive to make it. The email came at noon. A clean, simple PDF. DocuSign fields, highlighted in yellow. I read every word, not because I didn't trust Larry, but because I owed it to myself to see my name in print, tied to something real, something mine. And then I signed. The moment my finger slid across the screen, something in my chest exhaled. Not a breath, a weight, a release. Not revenge, not justice, just release. That night, I sat in bed, tea in hand, and stared at the photo of me and Ethan again. I did it, I whispered. I protected what we built. The TV flickered silently in the corner. Some local news anchor yammering about weather and water restrictions. I wasn't watching, not really. Until I saw my porch. I blinked. The screen cut to footage of my front yard. The for sale sign. Amanda on the porch arguing with someone off camera. A reporter's voice. A North Hills couple was shocked to discover the home they've been living in for months is no longer theirs. The property, long owned by the man's elderly mother-in-law, was quietly sold this week while she was recovering in a local care facility. The anchor chuckled. Guess you never know who really owns the keys. I set my cup down. And I smiled. The phone rang 13 times that night. Amanda, then Ethan, then Amanda again. No voicemails. Just a relentless rhythm of control slipping through their fingers. I didn't answer. I'd already said what needed saying, not in words, but in action. I watched the city lights flicker through the narrow window in my room, the reflection of the television still frozen on that frame of Amanda, gesturing wildly on my front porch, her expression caught between outrage and disbelief. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was clarity. The next morning, the charge nurse wheeled in my breakfast and gave me a curious look. You're on TV, she said softly, setting the tray down. I saw, I replied. Is it true? You sold your house while they were still living in it? I picked up my spoon. It was never theirs. She didn't press further, just smiled, thin and respectful, and left me to my oatmeal. By 10, Larry called again. We're in escrow. Buyer wired the funds this morning. They want a quick close. 10 days, like we said. Let's make it 8, I said. He laughed. You sure you weren't a lawyer in a past life? No, I said. Just a woman who finally stopped being polite. 2 hours later, Mira called. Local news wants a comment, she said. Apparently, the daughter tried to claim elder abuse. Did they mention who owns the deed? County records are clear. Everything is legal. Clean. You're protected. Then they can run whatever story they like. I've said my piece. But I hadn't. Not yet. That afternoon, I asked for a pass to visit the notary. Hospital policy required a nurse escort and a ride in the facility van. It was a small office behind a bakery, the kind of place with faded posters and a clerk who didn't bother with small talk. I signed what needed signing. Power of attorney to Larry for the transfer of remaining utilities. A formal revocation of permission for Amanda or Ethan to reside on the premises. A notarized delivery order, couriered directly to the house. They'll get it tomorrow morning, Larry said, flipping through the packet. You're sure about the 7-day notice? I gave them 19, I said quietly. More than they gave me. I returned to the hospital just before dinner. The hallway smelled like tomato soup and Lysol. Alice was back in the room, asleep with her mouth open. I sat in the chair by the window and pulled the blanket over my knees. The eucalyptus trees were swaying again. I imagined my garden, or what was left of it. blooming quietly without permission. The next morning, I didn't have to imagine. Mira sent me photos. Amanda on the porch again, holding a thick envelope in one hand, her phone in the other. Ethan standing behind her, arms crossed, eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. The caption under the image: North Hills home dispute takes legal turn. The article was short, dry, and devastating. The property was legally sold. Occupants were never registered tenants. No lease, no ownership claim, no case. My favourite line was near the end. When asked for comment, the previous owner simply stated, "I didn't leave my house, I reclaimed it." I hadn't actually said that, but Mira had. She told me after the fact. "You're welcome," she said. "It sounded like something you'd say." She was right. The rest of the week passed in a strange calm. Amanda didn't call. Ethan didn't text. The hospital staff stopped trying to explain the news stories when they realized I wasn't embarrassed. One nurse left me a note tucked under my teacup. "You're a legend." I chuckled softly and saved it in my book. On the 6th day, the hospital caseworker came by with a clipboard and a smile. "Your discharge is approved. The insurance cleared it. Do you have a place to go?" "I do." "Would you like help coordinating transport?" "Yes," I said, "but not back to my old address." She nodded. "Where, then?" I gave her the name of a short-term apartment complex downtown. Small, furnished, nothing flashy. Mira had helped me reserve it. She knew someone who managed the property. "No strings," she'd said. "Just a place to breathe." I spent the evening packing what little I had. A few clothes, the photo of Ethan and me, my documents, and a small potted rosemary I'd kept on the windowsill. The nurse who helped me fold my blanket asked, "A gift?" "No," I said. "A reminder." The next morning, the van pulled up to the front curb. I took one last look at the hospital entrance, then climbed in without help. The drive was quiet. I watched the neighborhoods change through the window, from dry suburbs to buzzing corners filled with diners and bookstores and people who didn't know my name. That was the point. When we arrived, I asked the driver to wait. I stood for a moment on the sidewalk, the keys in my hand. I breathed in the air, faint car exhaust, city soil, something sweet from a bakery nearby. I stepped inside my new apartment, 2 rooms, a kitchenette, a window with a fire escape. Nothing like the old house, but it was mine, and no one else had the key. The first thing I did in the new apartment was open the window. The pane stuck at first, painted over too many times. I pressed both palms against the frame and heaved. It groaned open an inch, then another. Cool city air slipped in, carried with it the scent of wet asphalt and baked bread. Somewhere below, someone was arguing into a phone, and I could hear the hiss of a bus's brakes as it pulled away from the corner. It wasn't quiet, not like the garden had been, but it wasn't theirs. I stood in that breeze for a long time, let it press against my face, let it tell me in its noisy, indifferent way, "You're not hidden anymore. You're not an afterthought in someone else's house. You are here. You are visible. You exist." That night, I boiled water on a new stove and made tea with the last of my peppermint sachets. I didn't use a mug with history, just the one that came with the apartment. It didn't matter. The silence tasted the same. I didn't sleep much, not out of worry. Just the unfamiliar bed, the unfamiliar light through blinds. But my heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I lay awake with the blanket pulled to my chin and watched headlights crawl across the ceiling like slow-moving ghosts. I had no idea what tomorrow would bring, and for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare me. In the morning, I opened my email. There were 2 messages from Mira. The first, escrow closed, funds received, transfer complete. The second, courier confirms notice was received at 8:15 a.m. Amanda signed for it herself. Below that, she'd attached a screenshot of a news clip. The headline read, "Local woman claims mother duped. Her out-of-family home." In the photo, Amanda stood on the front lawn. Hair curled, face tight with frustration, the kind she used to save for waiters who got her order wrong. Her blouse was ironed, her earrings just large enough to catch the light. She always dressed like she was waiting for a camera, even when no one was looking. Or maybe especially then. The quote beneath the image was hers. "We were taking care of her. This is how she thanks us?" I stared at the words, taking care. I remembered the bruises on my elbows from falling in the bathtub, the unanswered calls from the rehab ward, the box of my belongings dumped on a hospital tray table like a donation, and I thought, if that's what care looks like, no wonder women like me end up in silence. I didn't reply to Mira's emails, just closed the laptop and poured another cup of tea. At noon, my phone rang. Ethan. I didn't answer. Then Amanda. 3 calls in a row. Then a text. "You can't do this. We have nowhere else to go." I turned the phone face down on the counter. That evening I took a walk, just 3 blocks, down to a small plaza with benches and a bookstore that still had a bell on the door. I didn't go inside. Just stood near the window, looking at the spines of old paperbacks and letting the rhythm of life move around me. When I came back, there were 3 more messages. One from Amanda. "What do you want? Do you want me to beg?" I didn't reply. 2 days passed. The headlines faded. Amanda stopped calling. The silence was loud, but not painful. Then, on the 3rd morning, there was a knock at the security door downstairs. I checked the camera feed. She was standing there, alone. Her hair was pulled back. No makeup, no earrings, just a grey sweatshirt and a duffel bag slung over her shoulder like a student going home after a semester that didn't go as planned. She pressed the intercom button. Her voice came through thin and tired. "Mum, please." I didn't move. "I don't know where to go. Ethan left, said he can't do this. I didn't think it would end like this." She looked up at the camera, her eyes glassy, her mouth trembling in that way children do when they're almost too tired to cry. "I know I messed up. I know I was cruel. I just thought—" She trailed off. "Please let me come up, just for a little while, just to talk." I stood at the monitor, hands folded in front of me. She waited. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Then I reached for the intercom, and I said, "You treated me like a placeholder. Now you can wait too." Then I pressed the button to disconnect. She didn't ring again. She just sat on the curb for a while. Eventually she stood, wiped her face with her sleeve, and walked down the block. She didn't look back. I didn't either. She didn't come back the next day, or the one after that. I thought I might feel something, regret, guilt, maybe even doubt. But what I felt was something quieter, something steadier. Not anger, not vindication. Just a kind of settling, like dust finally choosing where to land after a long storm. On the 3rd morning, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a text. A real envelope, folded carefully, addressed in Amanda's hand. The handwriting was thinner than I remembered. Neater, as if she thought clean lines might make her words more believable. I held it for a while before opening it. Let it rest in my lap while the kettle hissed. Let it sit beside me while I watched the pigeons argue over crumbs on the fire escape. Eventually I opened it. It wasn't long. 3 paragraphs. The first was what you'd expect. "I'm sorry. Not for what she did, but for how things happened. She wrote that phrase 3 times, how things happened, as if it had all been an accident, something no one controlled. The second paragraph asked if we could meet. Not about the house, not about the money, just to talk. And the third was about Ethan, how he left, how he said, "This isn't what I signed up for," how he took his things and vanished like a man late for a meeting. She said she wasn't surprised. She signed it, "Love, Amanda," and underlined the word love as if that gave it more weight. I folded it in half and placed it in the drawer next to my tea. Not out of sentiment, but so I could remember the exact tone she used when trying to rewrite a story she didn't expect me to own. That afternoon, I called Larry. "She sent a letter," I told him. "Expected that," he said. "They always do after the dust clears. She wants to meet." "You planning to?" I paused. "I don't know. Maybe." "Well," he said, "if you do, remember, she's not the only one who gets to define what reconciliation looks like." "I know. And it's not weakness to listen. It's just listening." "I know that too." He paused. "But if you want my advice, let her feel the silence a little longer." I smiled. "I already have." Later that evening, I walked to the bookstore. The bell above the door chimed softly. The man behind the counter nodded but didn't ask if I needed help. I appreciated that. I wandered the aisles slowly, touching spines, reading blurbs I wouldn't remember. I bought a used copy of The House of Mirth. I liked the irony. Back at home, I made soup from a packet, opened my book, and sat by the window. Around 9, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. When I played it, it was Amanda. Her voice was different. Quieter, maybe. Or maybe just tired in a way that wasn't performative this time. "I just wanted to say I understand," she said. "I do. You gave and never asked. And I took and thought I was entitled to more. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just didn't want to leave it unsaid." There was a pause. "I remember the way you used to fold towels, with the corners lined up perfectly. I do that now. It's stupid, but it makes me think of you. That's all. Good night." She hung up. I didn't cry, but I felt something move behind my ribs. Not a break, not a wound. Just a memory shifting into a place it could rest. The next morning, I wrote her back. A letter, like she did. "Dear Amanda," I wrote. "I'm not angry anymore, but that doesn't mean I forgot." I paused, the pen warm in my hand. I didn't ask for anything extraordinary, just kindness, just respect. You gave me neither. You didn't fail as a daughter because you made mistakes. You failed because you treated me like a burden the moment I wasn't useful. I took a breath, then continued. "But I see now that silence didn't protect me. It just let you believe I would always say yes. And now you know I won't. I didn't sign it, love. I just wrote my name, folded the paper, slid it into the envelope, and didn't send it. I kept it. Sometimes words aren't for the other person. They're for you. To remind you of what you lived through and what you'll never live through again." By the end of the week, the world had moved on. No more reporters, no more headlines. The local news had found something else, a missing dog, a city council scandal. My story had drifted to the bottom of the feed, just another oddity in the stream of content. But I was still here. I started going outside more. Walks in the morning, grocery store runs in the afternoon. I liked watching people who didn't know me. It reminded me that I wasn't defined by what happened. I was just a person among other people, choosing what to do with her day. One afternoon, at the corner produce market, a girl behind the register handed me my change and said, You're the one from the house story, right? I nodded slowly. I am. She looked at me for a moment, then said, "Good for you." That was all. Just those 3 words. But they felt like a coat being buttoned at the neck. Not protection exactly, but something close. When I got home, there was a message waiting. This time, not from Amanda. It was from Mira. "Thought you might want this," the text read. Attached was a photo, a manila envelope, torn open at one end. Inside it, a handwritten list, Amanda's handwriting again. It was a breakdown of items in the house, marked with things like ours, hers, storage, trash. Mira had found it when she went back for the last of her signage. It had been left on the dining table. One line stood out. "Ellie's old books. Just toss." I zoomed in on the photo. I recognized the titles. Ethan's first edition of Steinbeck, my leather-bound copy of Wuthering Heights, the poetry I used to read when Amanda was small, her head on my lap, her breath slow and even. Just toss. I put the phone down and closed my eyes. The next day, I mailed a box to myself. Inside, a few of my own things, not from the house. I'd made peace with what was left behind. But things I chose now. A new teapot, a pair of soft socks, a hard-bound journal with thick, cream-coloured paper. On the first page, I wrote, "This home began with truth." And below that, "I will not hand it over for comfort, not even to my own doubt." That night, I slept with the window open. The city didn't quiet, but I no longer needed it to. I'd lived through enough quiet that screamed. At 3:12 a.m., I woke to a light knock on the door. 3 soft taps. I didn't move. I waited. The sound didn't come again. The next morning, I found no note, no sign of anything unusual. But I knew. Something in me knew it had been her. Amanda. Just checking. Just hoping, maybe. Or maybe not. Maybe it was the ghost of her entitlement, knocking one last time. That same afternoon, Mira called again. "I have an offer," she said. I blinked. "On what?" "Your story." She hesitated. "There's a producer. Small docuseries on women reclaiming their lives later in life. Not sensationalized, not flashy. They want truth, real voices. I sent them your story. Anonymously at first. They want to talk." I didn't speak right away. "You don't have to say yes," Mira said gently, "but I thought you should at least know that someone sees what you did for what it is." "What is it, Mira?" She paused. "You reminded people that power isn't just in shouting. Sometimes it's in doing exactly what no one expects you to do. Quietly, completely, and without asking permission." I closed my eyes. "I'll think about it," I said. Later, I sat by the window again, pen in hand, journal open. I didn't write anything profound, just a list of things I no longer owed. Explanations to people who chose not to understand. Apologies for needing rest. Space in my heart for those who treat presence as proof of ownership. And then, without thinking, I wrote her name. Not Amanda. Not my daughter. Just her name, in cursive. I looked at it. I let it sit there. And then I turned the page. The call came 3 days later. Not from Mira, not from Amanda. It was from the producer. Her voice was calm, not too bright, not rehearsed. She introduced herself as Natalie. "We don't want to sensationalize you," she said quickly. "We're not interested in villains. We're interested in the moment a woman says, 'No more.'" I listened. "I've read everything," she continued, "twice. And what stood out most wasn't the house or the headlines. It was that you did it all from a hospital bed. That's not just a plot point. That's power." I stayed silent. "I'm not asking you to perform," she said. "Just to talk, Like you'd talk to a friend, the kind who's still not sure if she's allowed to take up space. I looked out the window. The sky was grey that day, low and heavy, like it was trying to remember something. I'm not interested in being a symbol, I said finally. Good, Natalie replied. We don't need a symbol. We need a voice. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I told her I'd think about it. After we hung up, I made tea. Sat at my kitchen table with the quiet hum of the radiator and the flicker of a candle I'd bought just because I liked the name on the label, Evening Fig. I thought about the versions of me that had existed in other people's minds. Amanda's version, the hospital staff's version, even Ethan's toward the end, when he'd tell the neighbors, she just wants to take care of everyone. That was true, but not complete. No one had ever asked if I wanted to take care of myself. That night, I dreamed of my house, not the staged version with grey paint and new art, but the one with the uneven wallpaper, the water glasses on the nightstand, the scent of lavender from the drawer sachets Ethan insisted on refilling every spring. In the dream, I stood in the living room, barefoot, the afternoon light angling in like a memory. Amanda stood by the door, holding her keys. She said nothing. I said nothing. But she didn't open the door. She just stood there, waiting. And I realized she didn't know how to leave unless I told her she could. I woke up before I answered her. The next morning, I called Natalie. Only on one condition, I said. Anything? She said. I don't want the story to end with the sale, or with the crying, or with them on the lawn looking shocked. That's not the end. Agreed. And I want you to make sure women who've already been written off understand this. It's not about the house. It's about remembering you were the one who built it. Natalie was quiet for a second. Then she said, You just wrote the final line of the episode. I chuckled. Well, make sure you get it right. I hung up. Then I sat very still. For the next week, I spoke into a recorder. Not in a studio. Just from my apartment, sitting at the window, voice steady, stories clear. I told her about Ethan's chipped knuckle, Amanda's first panic attack, the neighbor who used to bring over zucchini bread and pretend not to see bruises on my arms when I bumped into door frames. I told her about the sound the new locks made when they closed me out of my own home, and I told her about signing the papers with no one watching, no applause, just the soft click of confirmation. And I told her this. They didn't steal the house. They took my silence. The house was just the first place I ever noticed it. At the end of the week, Natalie called again. You're going to change someone, she said. I'm not trying to. Exactly. The day the trailer aired, Mira texted. She looks good, she wrote. Strong. Honest. Like someone who never asked for a stage but got one anyway. There was a brief clip of me, only my voice, layered over a slow pan of a mailbox being repainted. You couldn't even see my face. Just a sentence, clear and calm. They put me somewhere quiet so I wouldn't be heard, so I learned to speak loud without raising my voice. The next morning, my neighbor, a woman named Sharon from 2 doors down, knocked with a plate of lemon bars. I don't want to intrude, she said. Just, thank you. I didn't ask for what. I didn't need to. I took the lemon bars, poured us both tea, and we sat quietly by the window. 2 women in their 60s, drinking something warm, not performing anything. Just there. Just present. I didn't think anything would come of it after the trailer. I figured maybe a few people would see it, nod quietly, then scroll on. That's what most stories are now. 2 seconds of attention and a swipe. But the emails started coming within a day. The first was from a woman in Ohio. She wrote, I'm 67. My son took my car keys when I had a dizzy spell last spring. I haven't driven since. He says it's for my safety, but he also drives my car now, pays no rent, says I should be grateful. I saw your story. I haven't spoken up yet, but I bought a journal. And I wrote, "You are not just someone they store." She ended with, "Thank you. You reminded me I was a person." After her came more. From Tulsa, from New Jersey, from a retirement village in Arizona where a group of women had watched the first episode together in the rec room and decided to form a discussion group. "We call it the Eleanor Club," one email read. "We just needed a name that sounded like a woman who stopped waiting for permission." I sat at my kitchen table, reading them one by one, my tea growing cold beside me. Not because they surprised me, but because they didn't. Because I knew these women. I'd been them. I was still them in some ways. Women who learned to disappear gracefully, who lived entire decades as afterthoughts, who were told that asking for anything more, space, money, respect, was a kind of betrayal. And now they were writing, now they were speaking. It didn't feel like attention. It felt like something older, something steadier. Recognition. Then came a letter. A real one, on cream paper, neat cursive, no return address. Inside, just a single sentence. "I watched you do what I couldn't." No signature, no name. I read it twice. Then I folded it and placed it next to the first letter Amanda had sent. 2 different silences. One heavy with regret, the other heavy with truth. That night, I called Natalie. "I don't want to be the whole story," I told her. "You're not," she said. "You're the door." A week later, she asked if I'd be willing to appear, briefly, on camera, just for the final cut. "No dramatics," she promised. "Just your voice, your face, your eyes." I thought about it. Then I said yes. We filmed in my apartment. No lights, no makeup crew. Just a small camera on a tripod, a woman named Yara with kind eyes, and a bowl of peppermint candies someone had placed on the counter without asking. I sat by the window. They asked, "What would you say now if you could speak to the version of you who agreed to go to that hospital that day?" I looked straight ahead. I'd say, "She's lying. It's not just for a week, and it's not for your good. But it doesn't matter, because you're going to come back louder than they ever imagined." The woman behind the camera nodded, her throat tight. But she didn't say anything, just kept the camera rolling. Then she asked, "And what would you say to the women watching?" I didn't answer right away. I thought of Ohio, New Jersey, Arizona. I thought of the unsigned letter, the folded towels, the rosemary bush that might still be growing beside the porch. Finally, I said, "We're not burdens, we're blueprints, and we have every right to renovate." They used that line as the closing shot. I didn't know until the episode aired. The day it went live, I turned off my phone. I didn't want to know who approved or disapproved. I didn't care who thought it was brave or who thought it was petty. I made myself soup, pulled on my thickest socks, and sat in the silence I had chosen, not the one I had been given. At 7:42 p.m., there was a knock at the door, a soft one. Once. I waited. Then I stood, walked to the peephole. It was Amanda, again, but this time she held nothing in her hands, no bags, no letters, no apologies ready, just herself. She didn't ring the bell, she just stood, waiting. I didn't open the door. I just watched her. And she didn't look up. She just breathed. Then she turned and walked away. She didn't come back after that. Not the next day. Not the next week. And for the first time, I didn't wonder where she was or what she wanted. I didn't rehearse what I'd say if she showed up again. I didn't draft replies in my head, didn't play out conversations I knew would never sound the same out loud. I just lived. There's something strange that happens when you stop anticipating a knock at the door. The silence shifts. It stops feeling like suspense and starts feeling like peace. I started going to the library again, the one 6 blocks from my building, with the creaky floor and the stained glass skylight that turns the whole lobby gold at noon. I checked out books I didn't need to finish. Poetry, cookbooks, a battered biography of a woman who started a flower farm at 72. I liked her smile on the back flap. Wide, unapologetic, as if she knew the world finally made sense in her hands. At the checkout desk, the librarian handed me a flyer. Senior Writing Circle, it said. Wednesday mornings. No fees, no rules, just a room, coffee, and people with stories. I went the next week. I didn't plan to share anything, just listen. But by the 3rd session, I found myself reading aloud from my journal. Not the parts about Amanda. Not yet. But the parts about the hospital, the garden, the locks on the doors. When I finished, no one clapped. No one needed to. A woman across the table, maybe in her 80s, said softly, "That happened to me too. But I didn't keep the deed." She said it like a confession, like a wound still warm. I nodded. We didn't say more. We didn't need to. Sometimes what you survive isn't the point. It's that you're still here, telling it. That night, I watched the episode again. I hadn't planned to. But Mira had sent me a message. Check the credits. So I did. There, between the names of editors and sound designers, was a single line. For every woman who gave too much and finally took it back. I sat very still after that. The next morning, I got a call. Not from Amanda, not from Natalie, from a woman named Rachel. She ran a local community centre, modest, underfunded, full of mismatched chairs and chipped coffee mugs. "I watched your episode," she said. "I've got a group of women who meet here twice a month. Some are grandmothers, some are single. Some have just come out of shelters. But they all have one thing in common. They're trying to find their way back to themselves. Would you talk to them?" I said yes, not because I felt ready, but because I knew they already were. The following Thursday, I took the bus across town, a Tupperware of lemon cookies on my lap. The building was nothing special. Beige brick, a faded mural on the side that used to be vibrant. But inside, the room was warm, alive. Folding chairs set in a circle, women greeting each other with hugs that said they'd seen each other cry. Rachel introduced me, but I stopped her after a sentence. "Just let me sit with them," I said. "I don't need a spotlight." So I sat, and I listened. To a woman who'd fled a house she built with her bare hands, to another who'd been signed into a home by her nephew without a word of explanation, to one who sold her wedding ring to buy a plane ticket out of a life that only looked beautiful from the outside. Then they looked at me, and I said, "I didn't do anything heroic. I just stopped handing over my voice." Afterward, they hugged me, one by one. On the way out, Rachel slipped a note into my coat pocket. I didn't read it until I got home. It said, "You reminded us the door opens both ways." That night, I sat on my couch and let the silence press in. But this time, it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like space, room I'd made, and room I could now fill. The day the escrow funds cleared into my account, I didn't celebrate. I didn't go out for a fancy meal. Didn't buy new furniture. Didn't even tell anyone. Besides Larry, who confirmed it with a simple, "You're liquid, Ellie." I sat at the kitchen table with the deposit receipt in one hand and my tea in the other. The money wasn't a victory. It was a restoration. A line drawn, not in revenge, but in boundary. It was never about getting rich. It was about getting whole. Later that week, the letter came. Not from Amanda this time. From a law office. Typed neatly on white paper, sealed in a heavy envelope. Notice of petition. Emergency motion to contest transfer of property on grounds of mental incapacity. There it was, the final attempt. I read it twice, then picked up the phone and called Larry. "They're saying I wasn't sound of mind," I said. He didn't sound surprised. "We expected this." "They're saying I didn't know what I was doing." "Well," he said slowly, "you did it from a hospital bed, alone, calmly, with full documentation, legal clarity, and a witness list longer than most city weddings. That won't stop them from trying. No, but it'll stop them from winning." He sent a copy to his firm's litigator. They prepared a formal response, submitted every document we had, emails, signed forms, phone logs, even a letter from my attending physician at the rehab wing, stating I was lucid, informed, and independent in decision-making. By the time the court set a date, I'd already moved on in every way that mattered. The day of the hearing, I didn't appear in person. My presence wasn't required. Larry went on my behalf, with 2 folders under one arm and a quiet smile he'd worn through 2 divorces, a probate scandal, and one very memorable HOA battle. He called me afterward. "Well," he said, "it's over." "Dismissed?" Laughed out of the room. I closed my eyes. "Thank you. You did the hard part. I just cleaned up." That night, I sat on the couch, knees tucked under me, and watched the local news, not for any coverage of the case, but just because it was something Ethan and I used to do. We'd critique the anchor's hair, guess what tie the weatherman would wear. It felt strange to do it alone, but not empty. Midway through, a segment came on. Elder women, financial power, and the quiet revolution. It wasn't about me, not directly, but the tone was familiar. The footage showed women in a community centre, reading documents, sitting in small circles, teaching each other how to recognize coercion disguised as kindness. I recognized Rachel, her blue sweater, her short, sure nods. They were building something, not a movement, a message, and I was part of it, even if just a breath of wind behind the door they'd already chosen to open. The next morning, I found an envelope slipped under my door. Not official, just a plain, soft paper. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single sheet, handwritten. "I'm not coming back again. I see now that I was never protecting you. I was avoiding myself. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope you get peace." There was no signature, but I knew who it was from, and I felt no rush of emotion, no anger, no relief, just quiet. A quiet I had chosen. I tore the letter in half, not out of malice, but because some things don't need to be kept to be remembered. Then I went to my bookshelf and pulled out the old journal. I turned to a fresh page, and I wrote, "Today, I closed every door I once waited behind. Then I made tea and opened a window. The weather turned warm again. Not hot, not yet, but warm enough that I could sit by the open window in just a cardigan and feel the sun on my knees." The eucalyptus down the street had started to bloom, the sharp scent rising when the wind stirred. It reminded me of the tree by the back fence of the old house, the one Ethan planted before Amanda was born. He said it would grow faster than we expected. He was right. I didn't think much about the house anymore. It had passed through me, like a story told too many times. I remembered the details when I needed them, where the creak in the floor used to be, how the kitchen faucet leaned ever so slightly to the left. But they didn't hurt now. They didn't pull. I'd kept the journal going. Most days, I didn't write about Amanda or Ethan. I wrote about the woman on the corner who walked her dog in polka dot boots, about the barista at the cafe who called everyone sweetheart, no matter how old they were, about the sound the rain made when it hit the rusted fire escape in the early hours, soft and unrushed. Sometimes I wrote letters I didn't send, to Ethan, to my mother. Once, even to the woman who shared my hospital room, Alice, the one who talked in her sleep about her sister's hair ribbons. I imagined they heard me. One morning, I got a call from Rachel. "We're doing a retreat," she said. "A weekend. Just the women from the group. Nothing fancy. Just a cabin in the hills and space to talk." I didn't hesitate. "I'll come." The cabin was old, its floorboards loud, its windows full of stubborn screens, but the porch wrapped all the way around, and at dusk the hills blushed gold. There were 10 of us. Different stories, different kinds of quiet. We made meals together, boiled coffee over a camp stove, sang old hymns no one had rehearsed. One night, we sat in a circle and passed a candle, each woman sharing a moment she wished she'd handled differently. When it came to me, I held the candle a little longer than I meant to. "I don't regret the house," I said, "or even the silence. What I regret is how long I believed being loved meant being useful." No one responded right away. Then the woman beside me, a former teacher who'd raised 2 children and buried 3 husbands, said, "You just described my whole life." That night, I slept without dreams. The next morning, I woke early. The others were still in bed, soft breathing from each room. I made tea, wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, and stepped outside. The air was thin and new. I walked down the gravel path behind the cabin, past the pines and the dry creek bed, until I found a flat rock warmed by the first fingers of sun. I sat, and I wrote, not to Amanda, not to Ethan, not even to myself. I wrote to the part of me that had waited so long to be chosen. And I told her, "You were always the home. They just lived in it." I folded the page and placed it in my coat pocket, even though I knew I wouldn't keep it. Then I walked back to the cabin, barefoot, the earth soft underfoot, and knew I had finally left nothing behind. When I got back to the apartment, everything smelled faintly of lemon. I hadn't left anything out, nothing spoiled, nothing left to rot. But still, something in the air was sharper, cleaner. As if the act of going away, even briefly, had aired out what had been waiting too long in the corners. I unpacked slowly. The shawl, the journal, the worn-out copy of the poems we'd passed around one night on the porch. One woman had read aloud a line I couldn't shake since, "We do not ask to be restored, only not erased." That evening, I made lentil soup and listened to the small radio in the kitchen. Classical music, nothing I could name, just gentle, layered notes. And it hit me, as I stirred in the cumin, that the last time I'd made soup in silence, I had done it for others, for Ethan, for Amanda, for neighbours, always quietly, always first in line, always last to eat. This time, it was just for me. And it was enough. I didn't hear from Amanda again. No texts, no letters, no calls. It was like she had finally realised that silence wasn't an invitation. It was a door, shut without apology. And maybe she had started her own reckoning. Maybe she hadn't. I no longer needed to know. Instead, I got a letter from a woman in upstate New York, a pastor's widow, 81 years old. She wrote, "When my daughter tells me I need to move out of my house, I nod. I make tea. But I keep watching your story, just to remind myself I have a right to ask, why? Then, thank you for not making it about revenge. We needed someone to make it about the quiet no." I kept that letter, pinned it to the corkboard by the window. It fluttered slightly when the breeze caught it, like something still deciding if it wants to stay. The following week, Mira called. "I know you don't want the fuss," she said, "but a journalist reached out again. Not tabloids, not TV, just a quiet, long-form piece in a Sunday magazine. She's older. She knows the tone. She won't twist it." I asked, "What's the angle?" She said she just wants to write about what it feels like when your name is the one on the deed again. Not just of a house, of a life. I said yes, not because I needed more telling, but because I wanted the telling done right. We met at the cafe down the block. She wore thick glasses and no perfume. I liked her immediately. She asked questions no one had asked before. "What were you taught about silence? When did you start saying yes without meaning it? What's the smallest act that made you feel free again?" That last one made me pause. I thought about it. Then I said, "I bought a new pair of slippers. Didn't ask if they were on sale. Didn't wait for approval. Just picked the softest ones and wore them the same day." She smiled. Wrote that down like it was scripture. The article ran 2 Sundays later. Simple headline: "She took back the key." There was no photo of me, just my words, a few quotes, the rest filled in by the texture of what it means to stop waiting for a door to open and turn the knob yourself. The reaction wasn't loud, but it was steady. More letters, more emails. A woman from Canada who'd left her name off the mailbox for years because her son didn't like when guests knew she lived there. A retired nurse from Texas who finally asked her daughter to move out. Not because she didn't love her, but because she'd spent 35 years giving space and needed a room of her own. I read each one, and I answered most. Always with a pen. Always from the same chair by the window, slippers on my feet, steam rising from my cup. And each time I wrote back, I signed the same way. Yours, in strength, not spite. Eleanor. The seasons turned again. One morning I opened the window and the air had changed. Thinner, lighter, touched with spring. The eucalyptus outside had dropped most of its leaves, and someone had planted tulips along the median. They wouldn't last in the heat, but it didn't matter. For now, they were enough. Bright, unapologetic. I had just finished writing a letter when the knock came. A soft one. 2 taps. I opened the door without hesitation this time. It was Sharon, my neighbour. She stood holding a tray with 2 cups of tea, 1 sugar cube balanced on each saucer. "I thought we could sit," she said. "No special occasion." We did. No small talk. Just 2 women letting the late afternoon light do the speaking. When she left, I folded the letter I'd written, addressed it, and slipped it into the mailbox downstairs. Another woman across the country would get it next week. Maybe she'd read it while stirring soup. Maybe she'd tuck it into a drawer. Maybe she'd never open it at all. But I sent it anyway. Because we keep going by keeping each other company, even when we never meet. Later that night, I stood at the window and watched the city below. So many rooms lit, so many women still in them, folding laundry, sorting bills, stirring silence. And I thought, someone out there needs this story, not to be inspired, not to be amazed, just to be reminded that it's allowed. Allowed to leave, allowed to say no, allowed to change the locks and keep the tea warm for herself. So if you're reading this, and something in you stirred, if you saw your reflection in my hospital bed, or the lawyer's envelope, or the voice that finally said, "I won't be quiet anymore," then say something. Write something. Do something, even if it's small, especially if it's small. Take the key. Choose your name. Buy the slippers. Open the door. And if this story meant something to you, share it. Not because I need the attention. I don't. but because someone else is still sitting in that chair, waiting to be remembered. Let her know she's not alone. Let her hear the knock. Let her answer it herself.